Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Susan Posnock, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Education for Jewelers of America. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler and Jewelers of America's co-branded webinar series. Today, Michelle Graff and I are co-hosting a session called Physical Retail is Not Dead. Our guest today is author and expert Peter Smith, founder of the Retail Smiths. Before we get started, I just want to remind attendees that if they have questions, they can type it into the Zoom Q&A box during the discussion, and we'll take questions from attendees following the main discussion. Also, our session today is being recorded and will be available at National Jeweler's website this week. Now I'll hand it over to Michelle to get the discussion with Peter started. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Susan. Peter, I don't think you need a larger introduction, but I'm gonna give you one anyway. So joining me today is Peter Smith. A lot of you know him. He has 4 decades of experience in the jewelry business. He is a consultant to retailers and suppliers and an executive coach. He teaches sales psychology in stores and delivers keynotes on retail, sales, and hiring. He's the author of 3 books. 3 books.
Hey, today.
And he is a columnist for National Jeweler and the Jewelry Book. Peter, it's so nice to see you even through a computer screen today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. Thank you, Susan, for the introduction. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good one. So I'm going to start by taking us back what has now been 5 years, which seems unbelievable. In April 2020, you wrote a column for National Jeweler kind of talking about this was about a month into the pandemic lockdowns, and it was talking about how people were forecasting the end of physical retail. They thought this was going to be the end of stores, end of malls. So 5 years later, where do you think we stand? And I'm also going to go ahead and share the link to that column in the chat so people can look at it.
Yeah, thank you for this good question. I recently reread that column as well, and I think the impetus for that really was just absolutely ridiculous narrative that was taking root very, very quickly, because as you recall, we sort of shut down in March. March was really when the shutdowns began to happen. And then all of a sudden we had just experts, falling out of the woodwork who were telling us what retail was going to be like. And I'm sitting there thinking, where are they getting all this information? Because I certainly don't have it. If you think about where retail is at today and where we've gotten today, first of all, I think we'll address the elephant in the room. Chaos and uncertainty from the tariffs are not good, right? They're not good for retail. They're not good for consumer confidence. And without consumer confidence, we're going to have some big issues further down the year. What I will say is this, which is kind of interesting, and it certainly relates to that column. The pandemic, as it hit us, again, depending on where we were, sort of that February, March period of 2020, it was, right, to 2020. In some respects, that was a reminder of what we'd gone through in the financial crisis, right? And now we have another crisis. At least I think we have a crisis with the whole tariff thing. And I think it's a pretty good reminder, however anybody feels about any of that stuff, that retail broadly is remarkably resilient, right? So we can have these things, whether it's the financial crisis of 2009, 10-ish, early 10-ish, or we can have literally a global pandemic. And now we have this. Of course, it's going to be uncomfortable for people. Of course, there will be adjustments that have to be made, but retail broadly is remarkably resilient. So in some respects,
as a side note, I think people are remarkably resilient too. But
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. So this idea that retail's going to go away just makes no sense. So in talking about jewelry retail, you can't divorce it from retail more broadly, and you can't divorce it from digital. You can't have a conversation about bricks and then pretend digital doesn't happen, because that's just simply delusional. And I almost feel a little bit like physical retail, even saying physical retail in and of itself feels like a little bit of an anachronism, because if you're a really good physical retailer and you're not engaged in digital commerce, your website, social media, your all of that, something's not right. It's just something is simply not right. So I think that in and of itself, it's a bit of an anachronism. But if you look at retail broadly, to sort of get more specifically to the question, over the last 15 years, really since we came out of the end of the financial crisis, retail has grown every single year. So in the 15-year period from the end of the, or more or less the end of the financial crisis in 2010, we've seen retail grow every single year. Now, it hasn't grown in a way we might have predicted, right? If we'd have sat down and whiteboarded or written a column about what do you think retail broadly is going to look like 15 years from now, what I don't think I would have foresaw is that you literally have 6 companies that own anywhere, depending on what you read, anywhere from 38% to 58% of the entire retail business in the US. And those are the 3 big sort of US companies, Walmart, Amazon, and Costco. And then 3 Chinese companies, TikTok Shops, Shein, and Temu. Between that, just those 6 people alone, they account for anywhere from the high 30s to the high 50s. I don't think anybody saw that coming. I don't think anybody saw that 2 of those retailers, Amazon, for instance, with 200 million Prime members, generates $44 billion in subscription services alone. And when you look at Costco, if you're a Costco shopper, they generate $4.5 billion just in memberships that contributes 73% of their total profits. So when we think, how can they afford to sell, as they do, by the way, including jewelry and including quality jewelry, how can they afford to sell it so inexpensively? Because they get 73% of their profits from our membership. So retail has changed a lot.
Yeah.
And if we look at what the sort of the agencies and are forecasting for this year, I've seen recently Coresight Research is forecasting, and this was early enough in the year that it'd be interesting to see if they've changed the forecast, but they expect about 15,000 retail stores to close this year. And that's up from somewhere just slightly north of 7,000 last year. And it would be far and away the biggest, if it happens, even close, since 2010, when I think they had about, since 2020, forgive me, since 2020, when they had about 10,000 go out of business. So retail is both resilient, right? Because we're seeing this fantastic resilience, but in many respects, it's also Darwinian. And I
Yeah.
say that because, the middle is going away. And if we take our lead from the retail broadly, as opposed to getting, which I think we're kind of guilty of a little bit, we tend to get absorbed in retail jewelry as though somehow it was divorced
Right.
from, any other kind of retail. But when you see stores like Sears and you see stores like J.C. Penney and you see stores like Kohl's go away and fighting for their survival, it reinforces everything I'm reading and everything I'm seeing, and that is we've got retail is becoming bifurcated. It's really becoming, you've got the quality side of it or you've got the off-price side of it. If you're in the middle, you've got to be really really careful. So we grew, as we know, I think that column may have even touched on it. We grew from about 62 billion to over 90 billion in that period, which is just crazy stuff. One of the things I know how Harold Dupay had written about it, but one of the things I hadn't heard a lot about was, people talk about stimulus money and how important was the stimulus money in this great run that we've had. But what fewer people, certainly Harold was talking about it, were talking about was the amount of money that was spent by American consumers on international travel alone. $22 billion a month was spent on international travel. So, of course, when that stopped
Right.
in March and April and May, where did that money go? So we can convince ourselves a lot of it came from stimulus. I prefer to think a lot of it came from those folks who couldn't get on planes and
Right.
couldn't go anywhere. So
I mean, pardon me, but not only couldn't get on the planes, couldn't eat out, couldn't go to movies, couldn't go to shows. I mean, all of the things like in addition to
sporting
that
events,
fall under, I mean, what we always talked about for years, and that was leeching money from jewelry, was experiences. That high kind
That's
of
right.
whole bucket of
Yeah.
spending went away.
That whole sort of peripheral around it, right? Hotels and flights and Ubers and restaurants and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So, despite that growth from 60 to 90, if I just use uh, simple numbers, we have now seen, and you guys are writing about it on a regular enough basis, the number of jewelry stores beginning to contract, right?
Right.
So
Right.
we saw in COVID generally that's come to us, not a complete stop, but certainly close enough to it, where the multiple decades of closing and contraction was slowed. That's gone back the opposite direction now. And so I think what we saw was that period of 4 years, which was the biggest. I've written about it, you've written about it, and probably spoken about it as well. The biggest in our history. In some respects, it was papering over some cracks. And so I think that in many respects, that COVID economy sort of delayed the obvious for some retailers, and we're starting to
Right.
see that now as they begin to sort of close down. So,
All that extra money that people either had saved or weren't spending on
right,
this, they're back to spending on this, they've gone through their savings. So all that extra money has kind of dried up and it's competitive again. And if you're not, you're not strong enough, you're not going to be competitive. Is that what you're saying?
right, and those people are getting back on those planes and they're going and they're spending money,
Yeah.
elsewhere.
Not on
Um,
jewelry.
so that's not a physical retail challenge, right, Michelle? That's a lack of relevance challenge, and I
Mhm.
use that term a lot because I really believe in it. So the good news, and I think it's really, really good news, is that for physical retail, we are a social species, which in some respects was the root of that column that I had written in April of 2020. This idea that for thousands of years, we're going to all of a sudden stop our herding instincts because of the pandemic just made no sense to me. So we are a herding species. You mentioned, concerts, sporting events, etc. If you don't believe that, just go to an event and see how people conduct themselves. So this idea that we don't want to be in the company of other people just made no sense to me, and that's a powerful advantage that brick and mortar retail had. I'm thinking almost an unfair advantage. So when you think about things like social proofing, watching what other people are doing, or the fear of missing out, or this just basic human engagement, or then all the sensory triggers, which we may talk about later on, physical retail has a competitive advantage in that area in spades
In
over
that,
over
in that
over online.
people by nature like to come together and they like to get out and they like to be social.
Absolutely, and they want to be excited and they want to be engaged, and even something as simple as, which again, if you think about our industry and what a huge advantage we have, just the importance of touching product, right?
Right.
So that social psychology shows when we touch something, we feel like we want to own it, like it's ours, our brain acts like it's ours. And the fact that, I can't do that online, but I can go into a physical store and I can do that, that's pretty powerful stuff. Even the colors, the emotions from the colors that I see when I go into a store. So yeah, shopping online, you can still get that dopamine rush as you're flipping through and various things. But the physical retail is such a massive advantage when it comes to consumers, and nothing but irrelevant retail changes that.
And I mean, also, touching the product. And I think also getting a straight answer for somebody who's an expert. I think the problem with the internet is there's so much information out there. I think we've kind of gone the other way where a lot of people feel like they don't know who to trust anymore. And they'd rather just go into a store and ask somebody that's worked there for a long time, a graduate gemologist, an expert, rather than, Google it and get 50 different answers about whatever they're asking about diamonds or gemstones or gold. I mean, that's just my opinion. That's also how I am. I feel like I'd rather just go and ask one person who works somewhere and is an expert rather than sit on the computer and try to filter through 30 different search results and figure out what's wrong and what's right. But
I think there's the tangible nature of there's a physical place and there's a person, and I made eye contact with that person, and I feel like I'm in reasonably good hands. There's no question that that makes a big difference.
But I want to talk about foot traffic because this is something you've written about in class columns multiple times, including your column for the State of the Majors this year, which will be up next week. Everybody can read that then. But, foot traffic is down. I mean, especially, one particular sufferer of foot traffic are your malls, your kind of class
Right.
B and C malls.
Right.
So isn't that a worrying trend for physical retail though? If you have fewer people coming in the store overall?
I think that first of all, malls have their own unique challenges. There's no
Correct.
question about that. I mean, depending on where your starting point was, we've gone from 4,500 malls in the US all the way down to 600 or 700 now. I suspect when all is said and done, we're probably going to end up in the 400 area. Now, if you happen to be in one of those malls, the likelihood is it's an A mall. It's just got all sorts of interesting and cool stuff going on. And again, those A malls I don't worry about them at all. I don't think there's any issues there.
And
On
just
the
so everybody's clear, when you say malls, these are malls with kind of your higher end stores, an Apple store, probably a Lululemon,
That's right.
stores of this nature.
Often sort of lifestyle malls, often outside, you can eat there, you can shop there, you've got
Big movie.
entertainment as part of it, all of that kind of stuff. The notion of foot traffic itself, which is a proxy for unit sales, right? That's where that really comes from, because in an ideal world, every retail jeweler would have a head counter on their door. I still blows my mind to think retail stores don't. But in an ideal world, you would have that, and we would be able to look at real data. What we don't have that, so what we look at it as a proxy for foot traffic are units of sales. And when you see those go down, you know that you've got an issue there. What I would say is this: there are many retailers who are not impacted by declining foot traffic, right? Many retailers, because they're doing lots of things to ensure that they're driving people in their doors. And so I can have the averages go down. Somebody once said, I wish I could remember it so I could credit them, but if you don't swim, be very careful about crossing a river that has an average of 4 feet, because you might happen upon an area of that river that's 8 feet. The average is still 4, but you're going to drown. And I think in some respects, the averages look like that a little bit, because if you look at the most successful retailers, the likelihood is they have a robust CRM system. And if they have a robust CRM system, they're driving in more qualified leads. And if they're driving in qualified leads, they're converting more of those leads. And if they're converting returning customers, we know that they tend to convert at about 30% higher average ticket. And then they get the benefit of what the psychologists call psychological loyalty, right? I go there because I purchased there before. It's a low stress environment for me to go to on a product that can be a challenging product, right? I mean, there's a
Right.
lot of threshold resistance around retail stores. So I think that, you've got retailers doing that. You've got retailers who are investing in new tech, in new stores. You've got
Yeah, we
retailers who
see
are
that
doing
we see that a lot. I feel like every other day a national jeweler and an independent retailer is opening up a beautiful new store.
I think there's just some fantastic stuff going on. I mean, right off the top of my head, you got what Frank Adams is doing up in New York,
Beautiful.
what Kravat has done. I know you've written about CD Peacock, but just in Illinois, you look at what John Carter's doing at Jack Lewis. You look at what Shelley's doing. You look Person and Robbins. You've got creations in Napa. Literally, could go on and on and on. There are huge amounts of retailers doing really exciting stuff, and I think that should fill everybody, not just with confidence that things are going to continue to go well for some significant number of them, but there's actually a direction. If you too do this, you can drive it. Yeah, technology investments, building teams, comp plans. There's literally a menu of things that you could do that could position you as a retailer to where you ought not to be that concerned about average foot traffic declines. Now, if you're not doing them, your problem is not, again, about foot traffic. It's about the fact that you're not doing the things you ought to be doing. So that's sort of my take on that.
I I think that's a valid and very good take. Um, so you just mentioned a few stores. So I think you go into a lot of stores just because you're interested in retail. So tell me about the kind of stores, or tell us about the kind of stores that are doing well today and why they're doing well and what they're doing right.
Right. I mean, I've named a few of the retailers, and again, if I put my thinking cap on, I could probably give you a laundry list of retailers that have invested in their space, their current space, or they've built, an entirely new space. And that has to be very exciting. And I think from watching some of the things that I post, I'm very excited about some the evolutions that feel very modern, very contemporary, because I want them to look like a great and exciting store today, not a version of what it looked like in 1950 or 1960. So I think that would be the first thing I would say. The best retailers have a plan for their physical space and their place in the market. They're not sitting in decades old buildings expecting that to be relevant and compelling. They have curated stories and brands. And they're not trying to be all things to all people. In many respects, they're picking their niche. These are the things that we're going to be about, and not trying to be all things to all people. There's a cohesiveness about their touch points, physical touch points, the digital touch points, even the traditional touch points. In other words, if I'm on their website and then I go to their social media pages and then I drive by a billboard and then I see something in a magazine, they all look like they're from the same company. They're not
Yep.
doing bits and pieces of things in all those different spaces. The best of them are using data to manage their business, right? They're automating everything that they can automate to allow them to work on more important stuff rather than swimming in minutia. I mean, in some retailers I know they've got this sort of fear of data. Instead of saying, "Hey, it can be my friend. I can automate as much as I can. Then let me go work on some interesting stuff on this business." And as somebody once said, you can work in your business or you can work on your business. Very often those come into conflict. You've got to make a decision. Which is it? Are you going to be a slave to the floor, to your business, or are you going to automate as much as you can and then begin to work on the business? So that those are some of the things I would say that I see with better stores.
So what kind of stores are struggling?
This is a really interesting one. In some respects, we could go through a list of retailers who've gone out of business in the last couple of years and say, what are you seeing? I'd say there's a number of things. One, and I see this a lot, and it kills me, that retailers who believe they can discount their way to relevance, right? I mean, that to me is such a 1980s, 1990s deal, and I just have never seen it. That all of a sudden we give you a better deal than the guy down the street, and that's going to make us a healthy business. There are in some cases it's related a little bit, but there are lots of retailers who think I don't care for brands, but I'll knock it off. If you just bring in a picture of what you're looking for, I'll go ahead and knock that off. And the idea that kind of an approach can be interesting to people who are raised in brands and raised on brands is a little bit of a head shaker to me. Another one we've seen, and you guys have written about it fairly, I think, extensively, is, well, in fact, I had a column on it, which was life after Rolex, right? So
Right.
I see and I've heard of stores who have 60, 70, even 80% of their business relying on Rolex or a single brand. And then when the brand is not there anymore, it's a hell of a time to rethink your model, right? So I think we've seen some of that. But I think the biggest one I see, Michelle, is what I'll call a sense of entitlement. I think that's the bit. If I had to say what's the one thing that you tend to see, I think telling a consumer base that has been shopping, in stores like Everlane and Skims and Away and Rothy's and all of these brands that didn't exist all of these years ago, that they should shop with you because you're 50 years old or 100 years old. I just think that people are passing right by on that, right? So even in our space, even in the last 15 years, that was just when Pandora started to open their own stores. It was 15 years ago. We saw Gorgiana just hit 100 stores on their journey, and that's a fairly young brand. We've seen Kendra Scott's probably got 125, 130 stores. Again, a very young brand. So I would worry about this legacy play if it's legacy instead of relevance. I mean, it's great if they're evolving their model, but if they're not, that legacy play might work for your multi-generational customers. I don't see it drawing new customers in.
I want to add one thing since we're talking about stores that are struggling. You and I have talked about this before, Peter. I would say one thing I see, when a news comes to us, oh, this jeweler's 70 years old, this closing, this jeweler's 50 years old, they're closing. Lenore Fido and I, who is our retail reporter here, we always go and look at their website and social media. And I can't tell you how many of them, like I can take one look at their website and be like, no wonder, like this website looks like it was made in 1998 and never touched again. And they have little to no presence on social media. And, everyone else is on, not only do they have an Instagram account now, but they're doing reels, they're doing stories, they're on TikTok. They're just, you know, communicating to younger consumers in the way that younger consumers communicate. And, these, like you said, brands that stores have been around a long time, they have these dated looking websites, they have no social media presence. That's a killer today. And I don't care
Yeah,
if you've been around for 120 years, you need to evolve and change with the times.
you're totally right. And I think, and we've seen this because I'll occasionally see quotes attributed to folks who are going out of business, and they'll talk about, the web, or they'll talk about, the pandemic or whatever it might be, getting righteous about the things you didn't do that led to that being the best option for you, right? Because I hear from people all the time, well, people are retiring. And of course, people retire. But for years and years and years, people have retired, but somebody in the family took over the business. Somebody in the community bought the business. Somebody in the store took over the business. I'm not sure in my decades in the industry I've ever seen so many stores just close, right?
Yeah.
They just shut down. And that's not true of all of them. We're seeing, some stores we've written. I know you've written in recent weeks about some folks who have taken over stores, and I love seeing that as opposed to they're shutting down. But I've never seen so many just literally close their door and be done. And that's I hate to hear that.
So you visit a lot of jewelry stores specifically as part of your work. So talking specifically about jewelers, what do you think the best jewelers are doing today as far as now I want to talk specifically about the in-store experiences. When you go into a store, what in your mind makes it a good store? You walk in and you're like, yes, like they're doing this right. Customers are going to come in here and love it.
Yeah. I'll give you some practical sort of answer to that, but I would say that the first thing is, how does it feel when you walk into it? I mean, you can walk into a store and in a split second, no, there's something cool about this. There's something interesting about
I know
this.
you want to stay and buy something.
I know you want to stay, you want to engage, you want to ask about some of the choices they made about different things. So in some respects, the first thing I would say is it just has to feel like a place that people would want to come in and sort of spend some time in. So in no order of priority, I go through a few. I would say first of all, the better stores for me have a professional manager, right? I mean, I know that may seem like a small thing, but rather than the owner having to do all of the things, to actually put a professional manager on the floor to me is an absolute game changer. The second thing I'll do, and I realize that there's some repetition on this, but I make no apology for that because I think we sort of need to hear some of this stuff over and again, is they're not trying to be all things to all people. They have a sort of curated story. You can see it. I
Yeah.
mean, Foot Locker is being bought supposedly by Dick's for 2.2 billion or 2.3 billion, whatever it is. When you go into Dick's now versus Dick's Sporting Goods versus even a year ago, 2 years ago, you're seeing these wonderful little environments for
Yeah.
different brands and things that they've got it. Like they're really starting to get it. And I would hope that, that if they do buy Foot Locker, that just we'll see that situation grow even still. That's what the best retail jewelry stores look like to me. You can come in and you can feel a sense of it's not just a basic case line and overflowing with goods. You have a sense for separated environments, and there's something interesting about that. Connected to that, I think, is this notion of continually investing in their space, their business, and themselves. right? That there's a sense for we're constantly learning over and again. They're using data and automation as much as possible, right? I know we're not going to get into AI, really, but you see so much with AI now in terms of customer engagement and personalization and inventory and supply chain management and in-store technologies. So I'm not saying they have to be sort of masters of AI, but you have to have a sense that this is kind of a modern feel and that business has been run on more than just gut instinct. People, people, people. The best
Yep.
stores, I'm honest to goodness that if I hear once more, I can't get good people. And then when you actually break down why somebody ought to come work for them, you think there's your answer, right? You don't give them a compelling enough reason to want to come work for you, whether it's zero benefits, a very basic salary. There's nothing about it that's a meritocracy. You don't offer this, but there's no, this. It's just the best stores have the best people. It's as
Yep.
simple as that. We often hear the term sleeping money. The best sleeping money are great people, and that's not they're nice people. Nice is good. That's not that they're not stealing from you. That's good, but they actually sell. They're actually driving business. They understand that their job is to actually drive business. So that would be something I would say
Yeah,
connected
on
to that
that
is
note, I want to add something. When I go into
yeah,
store, I want the workers to be friendly. I want them to be knowledgeable, and I want them to be engaged. I don't want to feel like they hate working there, they don't want to work there, they're not interested in work there. I want to feel like they love the product too. And they know about the
absolutely.
product and, they're willing, they toe that line between willing to help you with being overbearing.
How about wearing the product?
Yeah, yeah.
How often you go into a retail store and the retail salespeople are not wearing the product? Now, I understand your engagement ring, that's a whole different story. But why wouldn't you have the single best billboards you have advertise your product? I'll never
I
understand
mean,
that one.
every time I go in, I'll just give an example of a store I think is done well, Sephora makeup store. I don't know if you've ever been in one.
Yes, of
Every time
course.
you go in there, all the salespeople are wearing makeup and their makeup is beautiful. The eyeshadow, lipstick, they have like a full face done. And of course you're like, oh, I like that. I like that. And they're like, oh, well, it's over here. It's this new eyeshadow we got on or this new mascara. And they look like people who like makeup and are knowledgeable about it. And that's what I need because I'm not.
Absolutely. And so you're getting into a conversation straight away. I love tell me what you're wearing. What is that you have on? I love this. I love that. So much easier than what brings you in today. How can I help you? I mean, so I think that
Yeah. It's
the
an
getting the
easier
people right.
icebreaker.
To me, it's like everything. Start with the people. The other thing is because I see companies with some good people, but then they have lousy comp plans. And so I think the comp plan has to be aligned with your ambition, right? So if you're paying for gross sales and then also complaining at the same time about discounting, turn your comp plan into a vehicle that delivers the things you want for your business. So I'd say that's a big deal. Touched on the sensory experiences earlier, but the difference it makes, think about going into restaurants, think about going into fun and engaged retail, where there's a scent when you walk in, there's a specific scent, or the music choices that are being played, you can hear it clearly without having to sort of shout over it, right? Or the light. The
And
light
it's,
is
the music and the scent are on brand for the product and on brand for the company.
for the store, for the brand, because I have to think about my store as my brand, right? And so that doesn't mean, curry in a bottle is going to work. You walk into the Weston and you get their scent and you immediately identify it with the Weston. I'm not
Yeah.
exactly sure which one it is. So I think it's so inexpensive for a retailer to pick out a scent that they can align with their store. I knew one retailer who used to bake cookies, and that's great. That was hers. So when people walked in there, she always had cookies going because that gave a very warm sense to customers coming in. So I think, and then the lighting, walking into jewelry stores and seeing the whole place lit up like Times Square, I don't understand that, right? You need your cases lit. You need above the cases lit. But why do you need the walkways lit? When you get contrast lighting, it dilates the pupils. You get the same effect as you do going into a restaurant when you're looking for that sort of nice romantic feel. And yet we don't seem to do that. And I think we ought to be doing that a little bit more. And then the last point on this is really believing customers are better served with rich experiences and quality product, not off price. This sort of de facto, I am serving the customer better if I can get them a discount. And the bigger the discount I can get them, the better I'm serving them. That's just a nonsense model. So I don't subscribe to that at all.
All right, my next question was going to be, what mistakes do you think our jewelry stores are making, or what are the biggest mistakes you think they're making, unless you feel like we've covered them already?
Yeah, fly through a couple of them again. I think the dated stores and cases jammed with products, right? That covers an awful lot of people. If it's a dated store and you've got your cases jammed with products, go look up something called the paradox of choice and tell me why it's going to be different for you. I think that the last point I made, believing that the customer's better off for discounting, not true. Salespeople who can't sell, not a good idea. Comp plans that undermine the goals, not a good idea. Marketing, this is one we haven't really touched on too much. But when you see people marketing and it's really about fits and starts, I'll do some here and then I'll do nothing. And then I'll do a little bit more over there and then I'll do nothing. And then each time they advertise or market, it's about something else. They don't get the association of repetition, which is so hugely important, right? This whole psychological principle called the mere exposure effect. If I see it again and again and again, and I see it across the different touch points, and if I see it all year long, it's got a much better chance of resonating than you put a disproportionate amount of your budget into October, November, and then don't do anything else, all year. So I think having a clear sense of what you're about and communicating that across all of the touch points, or at least the touch points you want to own, right? Because you can't own everything. You can't have all the billboards, all the radio, spend all sorts of money on the web, spend all sorts of money on social media. You got to pick your place, but then be consistent with it. Be consistent with it and get help from professionals. That's what I would say on that one. It's incredible how many people fear technology and data. That to me is, you think about, I remember doing a project a few years ago and counting up the number of SKUs in a typical retail store, and it was somewhere in the neighborhood of, between 3,000 and 6,000 SKUs. How you can manage that and why you would want to manage is a whole other story, but how you can manage that without data, is beyond me. Big one, tied to people again, no structured hiring process. When people say, I cannot find salespeople, and I actually start to peel the layers back from that onion, what you find is they have no sense of what to even look for, let alone, how to interview and engage. But so no structure in their hiring process. And then if they happen to have some decent people, invest in their development. Just invest in their development, whether it's training, whether it's sending them to places, whether it's in, there's all sorts of things in our industry that people can avail of, but you can't just put them out on the floor and then that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
So you have to invest in them. So if I can just quickly wrap up right on those, invest in your store, space and century. I got like 8 points here. Invest in your store for space and century. Have a structured hiring process and hire actual salespeople. Have a comp plan that makes sense, because having salespeople no comp plan, a bad comp plan makes no sense. Find your brand niche. Stop trying to be all things to all people. Have a coherent marketing message across all your channels. Embrace technology in-house and in managing your business. Invest in your people and have a robust CRM. If you think about all of that money that was spent in retail jewelry stores as a consequence of that $20 billion a month not being spent on travel, and yet if we went and visited 100 stores today, Michelle, I could tell you that a huge number of them would have no kind of CRM, which is to say those folks came in, they spent money in, more amounts than we had ever seen in the history of our business. And
And
now
then
they
they
just,
left and you don't know who they are, when their birthday is, when their anniversary is, how to reach
they're
out to
just gone.
them.
You gave them no reason to stay. You gave them no reason to stay or to come back. So that's what I'd cover on there.
I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but
Yeah.
I did want to ask you, on a personal note, I know for a fact, and we can see all the books on the case behind you, you are a big reader and you are also a big listener of podcasts. So can you share with our attendees today, what are some books and podcasts you've listened to recently or are reading or listening to right now that you think are great and that retail jewelers could learn from?
So I'll give you two of each. The two podcasts, one which is strictly retail, and I thoroughly enjoy it, and it's called Remarkable Retail. And it's got Michael LeBlanc and Steve Dennis. Steve Dennis has written a couple of books, Remarkable Retail, in fact, being one of the books. So I think that podcast is a must listen for me. They have all sorts of interesting retail people on there, very accomplished retail people. So that would be one. The second one I actually just discovered recently, and it's out of the UK, and it's called Nudge, Nudge. And it's a English guy called Phil Agnew, Phill, spells it with Agnew. That Nudge is 20 minutes, 25 minutes. It's fabulous psychology podcast that you can't help but learn from. I'll do the same thing on the two books that I'm recommending. One, I'll go strictly to retail. Uh, I read Selling Sexy earlier this year, which is the story of Victoria's Secret and the unmasking of an American
That sounds
icon.
interesting.
Yeah, well. In fact, the irony is, I listened to the two authors, Lauren Sherman and Chantel Fernandez. They were on a podcast, and I was so captivated listening to them that I bought the book. So yes, it is the story of Victoria's Secrets, but it is also the story of the American mall and of American retail period, sort of since that 19 sort of 60s and 70s period. So that would be one that I think is fantastic. And anybody, and this
I'm
is a
actually
book I
going to
read.
put that on my reading list. That sounds really, really interesting.
It's really really good. You'll enjoy it, and I look forward to talking to you about it. The book I'm going to recommend is a book that I read last year, and it was my book of the year. And I've read some awfully good stuff this year, but still, this is one that sort of resonates with me. And it's called Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, right? Using behavioral science in marketing, and the author is a gal called Nancy Harhut, Harhut. If you're in marketing, if you're in sales, if you're in business, that is a brilliant read, absolutely brilliant read. What I would say is read it and have a couple of highlighters because you'll be highlighting passages all over the place. So those are the recommendations I'd give you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And for all of you that are listening today, I went ahead and dropped those links to those podcasts and books in the chat. So I'm going to turn it back over to Susan. Oh, one more question, Peter. Sorry, before we get into Q&A, how can people reach you?
Two places. I think LinkedIn is a great place. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and also the retailsmiths at gmail.com. That's the retailsmiths at gmail.com. Those would be the best two places.
Well, thank you so much. And I know we had some questions come in beforehand, and we've had a couple pop up in the chat here today. Susan, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks again. That was a great discussion. I took a lot of notes. And we did have questions that came in beforehand, and one that you did touch on through your discussion. But if you can dig a little bit deeper in terms of what you were saying about hiring and, the fact that people don't necessarily have the right structures in place, what are some ideas and tips that you can give retailers when they're going through the hiring process to help them be more prepared to put that structure in place?
Yeah, I would say, Susan, I mean, let me be sort of entirely self-serving. Go read Hiring Squirrels, first of all, my book, Hiring Squirrels. But what I would say is having a clear sense for what it is you're looking to hire would be the first thing that I would say, because oftentimes people are looking for the appearance of what a good salesperson looks like, and it gets to everything from the appearance to, do they have just enough experience to satisfy the idea that they know their way around a jewelry store. So I think you've got, make a list of the things that matter. And what I would suggest very strongly is, one of the things that matters ought to be their desire and their ability to influence human behavior. Because on many levels, as we heard Michelle share the Sephora experience, you want them to be able to engage with human beings when they come in, strangers in most cases, of course, um, in a way that allows that the customer then allows themselves to be influenced and inspired to make purchasing decisions, because ultimately that's what drives business, is people spending money. So I think identifying the profile, which is hugely important, and then putting an interview process together, a gating process and an interview process, such that you're understanding what you're hiring. And just very quickly, I'll mention, there's a term I have for it that I coined called doer. Hire doers, DOERS. And what that means is somebody who has drive, because it's innate, right? You can't teach it. Somebody who has optimism, because negative people don't sell very well. Somebody who has empathy, because if you don't have empathy, you don't need to be in a situation where you're trying to influence other humans. And the last thing I'll say on that is resilience, because you're going to get a lot of rejection. And what I see throughout the course of my career is people who are not wired to deal with rejection are not going to be very good in sales, because they take it personally, right?
And you've
And
written about
you
this
can't teach it.
multiple times on National
What's
Jewel.
that?
You've written about this multiple times on National Jewel. They're
It's a,
like,
it's a huge thing. It really is. So the simple way to think of it is, doers drive optimism, empathy, and resilience. Hire doers, and it'll make a massive difference in your business.
it's great.
It makes a lot of sense. I am seeing that folks have been putting questions in the chat, which is fine, although it's a little harder if they start coming in to keep up. So if anyone else has questions, if you can put them in the Zoom Q&A, that would be great. We've had a couple of questions about trunk shows, whether or not it's something that if they're still effective. And then I see a follow-up question just asking, what you need to do to have a successful show. So I guess sort of part one, are trunk shows still effective? And you can answer the second part depending upon whether or not you think that's true, or, how to do it effectively, if they're still a good
Yeah,
tool.
I mean,
I
I have an
think,
opinion on trunk shows if you don't
yes,
mind
please.
jumping in. I think well done trunk, like it's the kind of like the overarching theme of this conversation. If it's well done, it'll do well. Like, so are trunk shows effective? It depends on how they're done. I think I've seen people put in really good trunk shows, but like we've been saying all afternoon, they make an experience out of it. The designer's there, they have some kind of food that's on theme, they have decorations that are on theme, or they have, they're doing engraving, like they're making some kind of, like something that ties in with that designer. Something about their aesthetic or where they're from or what their jewelry is inspired by. You have to have some kind of theme around the trunk show. It can't just be like, here's X designer, come see her jewelry tonight. They'll make it a ladies' night, or, make it some kind of theme. And I think that's what really draws people in. I recently interviewed a jeweler in Chicago. Her name is Viviana Langhoff, and she recently designed this gold line. And she's kind of, the prices got, gold is high, everyone knows, but she's kind of leaning in this collection to this idea that gold is an investment. And she had like a whole display in her store about the history of gold, and it just like all these facts about gold. And it was just really, it's really interesting, and it created an engaging evening. And, it was more than just like, I have new jewelry, come and see it. Peter, do you have anything to add to that?
I thought you hit it out of the park. The one thing I would add to it, and I'm sitting in Boston, and we've got lawns here in Boston. They do an amazing job when they do a
The
lot of
wedding
their
bands
wedding
are there?
band things. Yes, because what they're doing is they're driving people in. They're making appointments, and so all of that stuff you talked about, Michelle, is so bang on. But if your salespeople don't get and make appointments and call their customers and put real effort into driving people in, you're not going to have a particularly successful trunk show.
And this is where it goes back to data, because you're going to bring in X designer, this is kind of their aesthetic, this is their price point. Well, if you have your data, you can say, well, who kind of buys in that price point, and who's also bought a designer that maybe also would like this designer. Like, it's a very modern design, and I wouldn't call in your classic customers necessarily. I would go for the customers you think might be interested in this kind of look, this kind of aesthetic, and again, this price range. And I think that's where the data comes in. You can easily, let
And
the
that's where
let
the
the
CRM.
technology do the work for you and make you
Yeah.
a viable list of people to reach out to. Of course, you put it on social media and you let everybody know, but you want to be targeting the people you think 100% would be interested in this price level of jewelry that has this look.
Another argument for having a robust CRM, right? Customer relation management system. If you do not have that, where do you even look?
Right. I mean, it's like what you were saying earlier about it's just like if you're not taking people's information, if you're not entering and keeping track of your customers, they're out the door and you'll never see them again.
That's right. You haven't earned it.
Shifting to technology for a moment, what are some of the best display technologies that you're seeing that stores are using these days?
I don't know, Susan, that I would be I'd speak specifically to, given technology. I mean, on some level, you've got so many concerns when it comes to displays, security, ease of use, the aesthetic, and all of those things that matter. What I will say is this: less is more. Less is more. So again, if you're looking to structure in-case displays and set up your store, telling stories that honor the product that's on those displays ought to be something that you take very, very seriously, because when you walk into the stores and you see, 30 items on a 2 foot display, it just wants to make my head explode. So, I know that when I did displays many years ago for a company that I was working with, I sort of made a list of what are the things that matter. Ease of use matters, the aesthetic matters, the security matters. You have to consider all of those factors. Wear and tear, of course, matters. But whatever you choose to do, make sure that that you understand the whole notion of paradox of choice, that less is more. If you pile stuff on there and then try to tell me that there's something special about any given SKU, I'm just going to have a tough time believing you.
Right. And any thoughts on using technology to, improve the ability to display product effectively? Um,
I don't know that I mean, maybe Michelle, I haven't seen anything in case, and you certainly there's things that we see out of case. I mean, we've gone from, I assume that the question is not talking about sort of RFM and identifying that it's technology in terms of the aesthetic. I assume that's what we're talking about. I've seen things outside the case, but I have yet to see anything in the case that I think is a game changer. But I could be wrong on that.
I mean, I think the most important thing for displaying jewelry, and this is not I mean, there's probably better technologies in this field, but it's the lighting, right? I mean, that's the thing. If you're going to invest in something, I wouldn't be worried about some fad product or something. I would make sure you have good lighting. Jewelry's so beautiful. And I mean, jewelry's been around forever. I don't think we need to oversell it with some technology. Like, the jewelry can stand on its own. I think I go back to what Peter said. I think that you can't, don't overstuff your cases. And you wrote about this years ago, and I think about it every time I go into a store and there's just all this crap jammed in the showcases. Like, it doesn't stand out to people, and in fact it turns people off. So I think the most important thing, I'd worry less about technology and more about beautiful displays that are clean, lighting that displays the gemstones, the jewelry, the diamonds, the gold to the best of their ability.
I think also, I totally agree with what you just said, Michelle. Making sure that you're thoughtful about the color you use for your walls, right? I mean, don't just put your favorite color up there because it's your favorite color. Ask yourself if that's the best color to have behind your diamond case. So I think that contrast lighting, clean displays, all of the stuff that you just talked about, I thoroughly agree with that.
I don't think there's anything like advanced technology about that. I think that's just basic.
I don't want to compete with the jewelry. I mean,
No.
I don't know what advanced technology you could have to where it's not competing with the jewelry. Show me the jewelry. That's why I come into the store.
Yep.
Well said. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Um, Going to, what you have in your store, we've had a couple of questions come in just about training and how do you make sure that your staff is knowledgeable about the product that they're selling? Or as somebody just put it, that, you can have good storytelling, but it creates the need for good storytelling, also creates the need for people to know what they're actually telling the story about. So what are your thoughts on, how to really boost the training and
Yeah.
education of your
So
staff?
the best use of their money is to hire me to come in and do some sales training, hands down. I think our industry is really, really good on product training. You know, we have all sorts of organizations that do a super job there. And I think most of the vendors do a really, really good job sending their people in or accommodating folks in their, in their headquarters to give them some good training. So I think that really matters. We need to think about training in a very different way, though. We need to understand that product training does not help you sell more. We could do a whole other podcast on why those who tend to know the most about product also tend to sell the least. There's all sorts of data I could talk to you about that. So I think you've got to have sales training specifically and then product training. Those are two entirely different things. Sales training is much easier to get. Product training is much easier to get. I would start with my vendors. I would start with the various organizations in our industry. And then sales training is really where you're looking to teach people the important psychology around influencing consumer behavior. That's obviously one of the things that I do. And there's some other good people in the industry who do that as well.
I think that's a great point. I don't know if Michelle, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's definitely Peter's domain, so I'll leave.
Yeah.
I don't think I can add anything that's more than
We
what
would like to just say he's great.
Peter's great. Call him to train your people in your store. That's the third plug for you today, Peter.
Well, and I think that
Eating it up.
also speaks to your point about hiring in the first place, that all the sales training in the world isn't going to turn somebody who's not comfortable selling into a salesperson.
Yep.
So, understanding who you need.
You,
Well, I think,
just because it's an interesting point, Susan, I would say you can make folks who are not good salespeople into better versions of themselves, right? You can't turn somebody who doesn't have those doer qualities, drive, optimism, empathy, resilience. You can't teach that stuff, but you can put some guardrails around it and make them better versions of themselves. So it's not completely hopeless.
right, that's a good point. So people aren't going to be panicking that they have the wrong staff right now. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks, Michelle. That was a really great discussion and conversation.
That hour
Um,
went so fast.
I know.
Was it an hour? Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yep, it's just 3 o'clock now. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And just a quick reminder, after everybody gets back from Vegas, who's going to Vegas, my next question will return on Tuesday, June 17th at 2 p.m. And our staff, Michelle and the JA team will be recapping the 2025 Las Vegas shows. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting information and discussions happening in Vegas this year. There's a lot going on in the industry. So you'll definitely want to put that on your calendar for next month. And if you are traveling to Vegas, have a safe trip, have a great time. And thanks everyone again for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
State of the
Susan.
majors,
Thanks,
state of the
everyone.
majors.
Read State of the Majors. Thanks so much,
Right.
everyone. Have a great
Thank
Thanks.
you.
afternoon.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.